So I think what we're witnessing is political correctness presents itself as an extension or a continuation of the struggles of the 50s and 60s, whereas in my mind it is the complete opposite of that.
Yeah, exactly. Also, another part of this you've already alluded to as well is that amongst the people who would call themselves woke, and you mentioned them as being, say, like middle to upper middle class and what have you, or many of them anyway, there is also a good old-fashioned social condescension, isn't there?
Oh yes.
I mean, in class terms almost.
Yes. That's a key aspect of it. I've often thought that identity politics is essentially a way for upper middle class or middle class people to look down upon the masses, but in a way that seems more politically correct than it would have done in the past. One of the key aspects of identity politics is it allows people who have had a very comfortable life and a very nice life to play the victim. So if you look at, for example, the Rhodes scholars at Oxford who go around saying that these statues of Cecil Rhodes are deeply offensive and cause them to feel the wounds of history and all this other nonsense that they talk about. And you think to yourself, hold on, you are in one of the most prestigious universities in the world. There are millions of people who would sell their grandmothers to be in that position. But who never will be because they haven't had the opportunities that you guys have had. And yet you're playing the victim. So it allows them to assume this sense of victimhood as a way, in essence, of lecturing the masses of society who they see as unenlightened and racially unenlightened and sexually unenlightened and stupid and feckless and hoodwinked by the Daily Mail and hoodwinked by Nigel Farage. They really do look upon those people with utter contempt, and I've heard them expressing that contempt. I have actually heard it when I've had debates with some of these people, and they will openly say things like, people don't understand politics, they didn't know what they were voting for in the EU referendum, they are easily brainwashed, they're easily led, they're gullible, they're fickle, all those kind of old, almost neo-Victorian arguments about the idiotic throng in society. The kind of thing that John Carey wrote about very well in his book The Intellectuals and the Masses, which was about the kind of literary set in particular in the late...
Well, if you go back to the Bloomsbury Group and people like Virginia Woolf, the horror of the crowd.
That's right.
She sees these crowds going, I think it's to George V's coronation or something, and she sort of says, oh, these appalling, ugly masses of people and all the rest of it. This is very, very strong, isn't it?
Yes, and that's coming back. I mean, maybe it didn't ever go away fully, but it's now coming back explicitly. And I hear echoes of that kind of Virginia Woolf style contempt, or and there were other writers too, of course. I hear echoes of that now in a lot of the kind of woke discussion.
Yes.
And this sense that there is this swathe of people out there who are not very well educated, not really in tune with the right way of thinking, too right-wing, too anti-EU, too much enamored with the tabloid newspapers, all these things. And I hear exactly the same kind of snobbery that existed in the early 20th century, which of course there was a lot of anti-tabloid sentiment in the early 20th century. A lot of these people were very worried about the rise of mass education, mass publishing, mass tourism, all those things which really started to emerge in the early 20th century. They use those things to express their contempt for the masses themselves. And I think that's coming back with a vengeance.
You mentioned the Brexit and the role that this has played. I have to admit, I've been surprised by the level of snobbery. There's no getting that has been revealed by the was revealed by the referendum, which has been ongoing. As you say, the implication is these people didn't know what they were voting for. We, on the other hand, we knew exactly what we were voting for. And all the rest of it. When it comes to Brexit, Spikes has just endorsed the Brexit Party, hasn't it?
Yes.
And you've not endorsed a party ever before, have you?
Yes, so this is the first time we've ever endorsed a political party. We've endorsed the Brexit Party in the Euro elections, which are happening soon, and we hope they do incredibly well because it will be another statement of people's intent to leave the European Union. I sometimes find myself thinking, how many times do we have to say this? UKIP, when it was run by Nigel Farage, as you will know, won the Euro elections in 2014, right? And then in 2015, UKIP did incredibly well in the general election. And then David Cameron did very well because I would say largely because he promised to have an EU referendum. Then, of course, we won the EU referendum and 17.4 million people voted to leave the EU. And then in 2017, 80% of voters voted for the Conservatives and the Labour on the basis of manifestos that promised to respect the referendum result. You know, we have spent years and years and years voting to have a referendum or to respect the referendum. So there is this incredibly strong democratic public desire to leave the European Union. And Spiked is a very pro-democracy publication. We think democracy is one of the most important political value. And so the thing that worries us about the kind of Brexit phobia that exists in British society now amongst the chattering classes and the political class and the media class is that it is going to, or could potentially, undermine the largest democratic vote in the history of this country.
Without question.
And you're absolutely right that one of the key drivers of that sentiment is blind, unquestionable snobbery. I would go so far as to say it's class hatred. I mean, I never thought I would see class hatred come back in the way that it has. And the things that I hear people say or read them say about the low information electorate, you know, which is another way of saying they're thick as idiots. You know, they were hoodwinked by a bus. You know, apparently the NHS promise on the side of the bus is the reason people voted to leave the EU. You know, they were won over by demagogues. You know, these demagogues kind of invaded their brains and basically controlled them like Manchurian candidates to vote for leave. That's really how the political elite views ordinary people. And what I find interesting about that and terrifying about that is that the exact same arguments were made against the Chartists when they were arguing for the right of working class men to vote in the 1840s, and against the suffragettes in the 1910s when they were arguing for women's right to vote. The same arguments, which is that the working classes are too visceral, they don't really understand, they're not rational, or women are, you know, they're way too emotional, they couldn't possibly understand big important issues like constitutional matters or legal matters. Those same arguments are now coming back against Brexit voters.